All right, let's get started.
Okay, thank you, Michael. That's Michael Gonzalez. We couldn't do anything without him. Um, Welcome everybody on this beautiful fall day. Um, I think most of you probably know about the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group, and you had to come to us through our website, which is an absolute treasure trove of information. But let me just say that my name's Marjorie Cohen, and I'm one of several members of the planning committee of the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group. And we're people who are passionate about the history of the neighborhood, and we love to research it. We love to talk about it. We like to write about it. And one of the things that we like best is planning these programs, such as the one tonight, where we can share some information with all of you out there. Go to our website because it's really, really interesting, and it's filled with some wonderful blogs. There's a newsletter that comes out quarterly, and a building data base that's really interesting about all the buildings on the Upper West Side. So we urge you to take a look for yourself. And as I say, we've done so many of these programs, and they're usually recorded and they're available on YouTube. So if you want to take a look at kind of what our menu is, do go to our website, which is upperwestsidehistory.org. We have had some terrific programs where we have featured the places like Seneca Village, like Central Park. We've had the Battle of Morningside Heights. There's no stopping us when we start doing our research and trying to find things that are interesting to our neighbors. And one of the programs that we already had was with Andrew Alpern, who is an architectural historian, and he wrote a book called Posh Portals. His new book is just coming out, and he's going to give a program for us coming up. That's the coming attractions part of my spiel here. But tonight we're lucky to have one of our own here. Stephanie has been a member of the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group for a couple of years, and she's really added so much to our group and has been just great. And in that short time, she's written 2 books. Tonight, she's going to talk about the Firemen's Memorial, which we've all seen and maybe gone to programs there. Her 2 books are I'm going to get this right, Heaven on the Hudson, Mansions, Monuments, and Marvels of Riverside Drive. And I just happen to have the book right here, Fabulous Fountains of New York. And it's a beautiful book. And with Stephanie wrote it, and photographs by her husband, Robert Rodriguez, and they're beautiful. So let me also, Stephanie is very generously, she has asked me to extend to all of you an invitation to her book launch, which is going to be at Book Culture, which is on West 112th Street, right off of between Broadway and Amsterdam, on October 16th at 7. So I am going to turn this over to our main feature, and that is Stephanie Azaro.
Thank you, Marjorie. Thank you, Michael. And hello, everyone, and welcome to the Firemen's Memorial. The Firemen's Memorial on 100th Street is by far the grandest of the monuments in Bloomingdale. And it is as relevant and moving today as it was when it was created back in 1913. And while it was designed specifically to honor firefighters who perished while fighting New York's many conflagrations, it also indirectly tells the story of fire and water, and therefore fountains, because this is a fountain monument throughout the city. So tonight's presentation will be in three parts. The first part, to set the scene, will be a short history of firefighting in New York and how the lack of water affected that. Second will be a deep dive into the Firemen's Memorial, how and why it came to be, and the cast of characters behind it, which include firefighters and influential ministers and celebrated sculptors and scandal-plagued models. And lastly, it's kind of a bonus, a very quick survey of the two other fountain monuments within the Bloomingdale area. So to begin, when the city was first founded 400 years ago, New Yorkers had access to plenty of water from springs, streams, ponds, and wells, both for drinking and fighting fires. The largest source of fresh water at the time was the Collect Pond, shown here, and located then largely between Catherine and Franklin Streets downtown. 48 acres wide and 60 feet deep, it was large enough to have tested one of the first steamboats, and substantial enough not only to slake the thirst of the citizenry, but also to battle any fires. That changed as the city's population grew. Over 60%, in fact, between 1820 and 1830 alone. Existing sources soon were unable to provide enough to satisfy the greater demand for water, both for drinking and for fighting fires. That lack contributed to the losses of the Great Fire of 1835, caused by a burst gas pipe that ignited a coal stove at a 5-story warehouse at 25 Merchant Street, now known as Beaver Street. The fire began on the bitterly cold evening of December 16th, 1835. Strong winds blowing from the northwest toward the East River spread the fire. It eventually destroyed 17 city blocks, over 13 acres, and an estimated 700 buildings in lower Manhattan, causing approximately $18 to $20 million worth of property damage in 19th century dollars alone, which is somewhere around $600 million at the high end today. The blaze was so extensive, it could be seen as far away as Philadelphia. At the time, firefighters relied on neighborhood wells and 40 cisterns around the city that were a dedicated water supply for firefighting. Another key source of water specifically for that purpose was a reservoir built in 1831 at 13th Street, shown right here, 13th and the Bowery. This too was for firefighting exclusively. This was not potable water. Throughout the summer and fall of 1835, the department had fought numerous fires. On December 14th, it encountered two other large ones. As a result of all this, 2 days later, the date of the Great Fire, the city's fire cisterns were nearly empty. Firefighters turned instead to nearby natural water sources, attempting to use hoses and the Hudson River instead of accessing water within the city itself. But the frigid air made operating their hose trucks nearly impossible. And when the firefighters drilled into the ice over the river to get water, it froze in the holes and refroze the holes around the hoses. The lack of a reliable source of water was long considered a major impediment to keeping the city safe. Yet, by the time of the Great Fire, little had been done to address the problem. At the same time, finding potable water was becoming a major challenge. There were few sanitation laws in existence and no system for disposing of sewage and garbage. People dumped their trash and waste into the street. There were no sewers. This polluted the waterways. The collect pond was eventually surrounded by industry, tanneries, slaughterhouses, and more that contaminated it. The water not only tasted bad, but it could literally kill you. There were 3 major cholera outbreaks in the first half of the 19th century. In 1832 alone, 3,500 people died from the disease. Fortunately, the water crisis was finally remedied in 1842 when the Croton Aqueduct brought clean water to New York City from the Croton Reservoir 41 miles away in Westchester. Its first stop was the receiving reservoir in Central Park, where the Great Lawn and Turtle Pond now stand, so Mid-Park between 79th and 85th Street. It then traveled down to the stone fortress-like pyramid at 42nd Street. Some said it looked like an Egyptian pyramid, and now the site of Bryant Park and the New York Public Library. In response to this, there was much rejoicing and the creation of many fountains to acknowledge this life-changing accomplishment. So that is the backstory to how firefighters were finally able to access enough water to do their job effectively. Next came 2 significant events that directly impacted the Firemen's Memorial. First was the City Beautiful movement. This was an outgrowth of the Chicago World's Columbian Exposition of 1893, which put forth the idea that cities did not have to be just places to live and work. They could be aesthetically pleasing, and that beauty, it was felt, would inspire social order and civic pride. In response, cities across the country began constructing magnificent classical style buildings and monuments. The movement lasted from 1893 into the 1920s. It was during this period that the Firemen's Memorial was constructed. The second highly influential event took place that fateful day in 1908, when the much-beloved New York City Deputy Fire Chief Charles Kruger met his demise. Kruger was known as Big-Hearted Charlie. He joined the department at age 21, was later promoted to lieutenant, and then captain. From there, he moved quickly up the ranks to the position of deputy chief. He served for 36 years. He was known to be fearless and had a reputation for heading boldly into numerous dangerous situations over the course of his career, and for narrow escapes. As a rookie, he fell through a roof to the floor of a fire site and, incredibly, landed on a bale of hay. In a gas fire on Park Avenue, he made repeated trips into a room filled with poisonous fumes to haul out a handful of his men who had been overcome. But that all came to an end on February 14th, 1908, when there was a fire at 217 Canal Street. Kruger, then age 56, was leading a group of firemen into an adjoining building to breach a wall and fight the fire next door. Within 2 hours, the fire was under control, and Chief Kruger entered the basement of that adjoining building with his men. And just as the men started to turn around to leave, they heard a splash. Chief Kruger had fallen through a trap door into the sub-basement that was filled with 6 feet of water. The chief's driver went to his rescue by hanging his legs over the trap door for the chief to grab, which he managed to do. But burdened by his 300-pound frame, along with a heavy long coat and boots, he soon lost his grip, fell back into the water, and drowned. Kruger's funeral was a memorable affair, one that, according to media coverage at the time, few firefighters who have sacrificed their lives in the service have ever received from the people of New York. At the late chief's home, 226 East 58th Street, thousands streamed past the coffin. The service was held at St. Thomas's Church at 53rd Street and 5th Avenue. At least 25,000 people filled the avenue, while thousands more crowded 57th Street, Columbus Circle, and Central Park West as the funeral procession passed. It was said that the wives and children of practically every man in the fire department flocked to the sidewalks. Automobiles and carriages of folk of fashion packed the crossings, and St. Thomas's was filled to the last inch of standing room with mourners from every sphere of society. Afterward, the carriages proceeded to Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx. Bishop Henry Codman Potter, the Episcopal Bishop of New York, addressed the mourners at St. Thomas. Bishop Potter is probably best known, especially in this neighborhood, for his role in establishing the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, our neighbor on Amsterdam between 110th and 114th Streets, and the largest Gothic cathedral in the world. In his eulogy, Potter said, "The firemen's service is a more splendid service than that given by the man in war or in statecraft. The fireman gives his service unselfishly, and yes, audaciously, and it is the highest of chivalry that we have in him." He added, "Shall the honor we are paying his memory here end with this service? New York is adorned with monuments to soldiers and statesmen, and it should have a monument to the splendid heroism of this department. Until that point, there had been none to firemen. It should honor our brave citizens," he said, "who have lost or will sacrifice their lives in a war that never ends." And that is how plans for the Firemen's Memorial began. Within 1 week of the funeral, a committee had been formed to manage what was referred to as the Kruger and Firemen's Memorial Fund. On February 24th of that year, the New York Times reported, "It is the purpose of the committee not only to erect a memorial to Deputy Chief Kruger and other firemen who have lost their lives in the performance of their duty, but to raise a fund large enough to provide for the care of such firemen's widows and the education of the children, supplementing the pension fund of the fire department." So the goal was beyond simply construction of the memorial that you see today. Things moved forward swiftly from there. Bishop Potter was appointed chairman of the committee, but died just 3 months later. He was succeeded as chair by Isidore Strauss, founder of Macy's department store and a Bloomingdale resident. More on him later. Public response to the committee's fundraising effort was impressive. The committee raised $90,500, or about $2.3 million in today's currency. Of this, $50,500 was through popular subscription. Most of the public contributed in small sums. 25 and 50 cents per person were common. In contrast, early on, the committee received a $1,000 check from J.P. Morgan, a significant donation equaling roughly $27,000 today. The gift may have produced a bit of peer pressure, for less than a month later, John D. Rockefeller sent in his $1,000 check, followed by Andrew Carnegie's identical amount just 6 days later. A number of benefit events also contributed to the cause, including a gala performance at the Metropolitan Opera House. Celebrities donated their services for the star-studded evening. Patrons paid between $1 and $3 each to see acts by George M. Cohan, Eddie Foy, and more. The benefit brought in $12,000 for the fund. The Board of Estimate and Apportionment allocated the remaining $40,000. With funding in hand, the committee began to address the questions of the monument's location and design. Initially, the northern end of Union Square was proposed as the location for the monument. However, when the Parks Department announced it as the choice, the fire department strenuously objected. And why? Union Square was long the scene of protests by what the department referred to as, quote, overwrought agitators. It was a major setting for the labor movement, including the first Labor Day parade in 1882, as well as a key setting for political rallies. The square was also a gathering point for socialist and communist groups. On April 9, 1910, Fire Chief Edward Croker told reporters, quote, he could not think of a site in Manhattan less suitable. And one reporter added, it is said he speaks for practically every man in the department. Riverside Park became Plan B. Two possible reasons. One was simply that parks are frequently the site of monuments, and Riverside Drive, with its fine 19th century mansions, was a logical and fashionable location. During the City Beautiful movement, it became home to other important monuments, including Grant's tomb, shown here, and Soldiers and Sailors Monument, as well as the Joan of Arc Monument. The 100th Street location in particular also offered an impressive elevation. Here, one of the islands that runs between the main Riverside Drive along the park and the upper roadway that parallels the homes offered an ideal setting. This happens to be the home that was to be right across from where the monument was to be located. This was the Dolger Mansion. It was on the northeast corner of 100th Street and Riverside Drive. The New York Times noted that at the time, that if a Riverside Drive site were chosen, it was Chief Croker's idea to have the memorial placed at the foot of one of the streets like the Soldiers and Sailors Monument. And that is how the Firemen's Memorial came to be situated in Riverside Park. Now that the setting, oh, one other thing, and while he had passed on before the decision was made, it is worth mentioning, at least as an aside, that Bishop Potter had lived on Riverside Drive, although on 89th Street, and this was his glorious home. Now that the setting for the memorial was determined, the next hurdle was the design. As with other monuments, among them the soldiers and sailors, different parties had conflicting ideas about what would be an appropriate and impressive memorial. One group apparently wanted the following: a huge statue of a fireman with a rescued baby swung aloft in one hand and a fainting woman tucked under the other arm. That was according to the New York Tribune. But that idea at last yielded to those who believed that something lower in tone and more classic in design would have a permanent value. To create and implement such a design, the Memorial Committee chose Harold Van Buren McGonigal as architect for the monument and Attilio Piccirilli as sculptor. McGonigal was an American architect, artist, and author, best known appropriately enough in this case for his memorials. He was the designer of the McKinley Memorial. This is in Canton, Ohio, and also of the Liberty Memorial in Kansas City. Both were commissions won through competitions. He was also president of the New York chapter of the American Institute of Architects. A New Jersey native, McGonigal worked for architectural luminaries such as Calvert Vaux and McKim, Mead, and White, among others, before opening his own practice in 1903. Most notably for all of us who live nearby, in my opinion, McGonigal's design was the winner for the National Watergate, a huge structure once planned along the Hudson River from 114th Street to 116th Street. The plans for this were made in 1909 for the Hudson-Fulton celebration, an elaborate commemoration of the 300th anniversary of Henry Hudson's discovery of the Hudson River, and the 100th anniversary of Robert Fulton's first successful commercial application of the steamboat. This was to extend down the slope of an embankment and 600 feet into the river, have a landing stage and a large monument to Fulton and a museum for nautical exhibits, all of it in white marble. It was a $3 million project. That was in turn of the century dollars, and it was never built. While McGonigal was the architect for the Firemen's Memorial, Attilio Piccirilli was the sculptor. Piccirilli was one of 6 sculptor brothers born in Italy. He studied marble carving at his father's studio there before the entire family moved to the United States. The brothers were responsible for a wide range of monuments in the city, from those of their own design to the design of others, including Courage and Fortitude, the famous lions at the main branch, the 42nd Street location of the New York Public Library, The Four Continents by Daniel Chester French on the U.S. Custom House at Bowling Green, and Lincoln himself at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. So we're talking about a very talented team here between the architect and the sculptors. Piccirilli and his work are so well regarded that he has 2 works of art at the Metropolitan Museum. One, Frangelina, The museum describes as simplified and almost abstract in form, noting that the head is ovoid with little articulation in the hair and face, and the eyes appear veiled in stone. It may be found in the Charles Engelhard Court, the large space with the atrium in the American wing. Most notably for today's conversation, however, the museum's other Piccirilli work, Study of a Head, what it terms an independent fragment, is derived from the Firemen's Memorial, the sculpture titled Duty. And it is on view in Gallery 774, in case anyone wants a close-up look, at the museum's Henry R. Luce Center for the Study of American Art. When McGonigal and Piccirilli were chosen, they were in the midst of collaborating on this memorial, the main monument, that very tall and very brightly gilded monument and fountain at the southwestern tip of Central Park, in honor of those who had died during the explosion of the USS Maine in Havana, Cuba. It was a very busy time for the team. The main monument was dedicated in the same year, 1913, as the Firemen's Memorial. In January 1910, architect McGonigal released a rudimentary sketch of what still at the time was expected to appear in Union Square. McGonigal told reporters, "The monument proper is in the form of a votive tablet about 25 feet long, 22 feet high, and 8 feet thick, flanked by two statues symbolical of duty and sacrifice, which was the firefighters' motto. An 18-foot-long bronze tablet would feature a bas-relief of, quote, a dash to a fire and the elements of a scene familiar to every New Yorker. Below it would be what he termed an ample bowl of running water for horses." When approached from the east of its current setting on Riverside Drive, where a narrow upper roadway parallels it, the memorial is not terribly impressive. It appears at first glance to be a large block of stone that's blocking the view of the park and the river. On the street-facing side, an inscription reads, "To the men of the fire department of the city of New York who died at the call of duty, soldiers in a war that never ends," which you may remember that last phrase was a quotation from Bishop Potter's eulogy of Chief Kruger. From the broader level of the main boulevard below, however, the experience transforms. And this is from an old postcard. A splendid wide staircase leads upward to a handsomely balustraded terrace. Taking center stage is a marble rectangular sarcophagus-like structure, its upper portion featuring that arresting bronze bas-relief that McGonigal intended of galloping horses drawing an engine to a fire. The original bronze was also sculpted by Piccirilli, but was pried off and stolen in the early 1950s, likely by thieves who were removing bronze from public artworks at the time to be sold for scrap. It was replaced by the current version. And all of the contemporary photos of the monuments that you'll be seeing here, by the way, are by Robert Rodriguez. Bronze lampposts at the base of the stairs of the Firemen's Memorial also disappeared. According to the Parks Department, some original parts of those lampposts may be found in the decorative lamppost at Verdi Square on Broadway, just to the east of the 72nd Street entrance to the number 1 train. The Firemen's Memorial is flanked on both ends by marble allegorical groups representing duty and sacrifice. To the north, a woman cradles the body of a dying fireman, a very Pietà-like pose. And to the south, the same woman, her expression both sad and stoic, clutches a fireman's helmet on her lap and embraces a young boy in her arms. The images, in my opinion, are heartbreaking. Audrey Munson posed for both of the women. I mentioned earlier that architect McGonigal and sculptor Piccirilli had been working together on the main monument at the southwestern end of Central Park, when they were called to the Firemen's Memorial. They were already a team. Munson, too, was part of the same creative band. She had modeled for the two men for the main memorial figures. Munson was, without question, the country's first supermodel. Her visage and form were considered the epitome of American beauty, and she was referred to as the American Venus. While perhaps best known to New Yorkers as the likely model for the Gilded Civic Virtue, atop downtown's municipal building, although there's some controversy there, she inspired at least 15 monuments around the city itself. Soon after arriving in New York from upstate, Munson began modeling in the nude for leading sculptors of the day, including Piccirilli, Frederick McMonnies, Daniel Chester French, and Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, among others. Life was good until the scandal. Munson and her mother, Catherine, were living in a boarding house whose landlord was Dr. Walter K. Wilkins. The good doctor became obsessed with Audrey and murdered his wife so that he and Audrey could be together. Condemned to death, Wilkins hanged himself in his cell while awaiting execution. According to Munson, his feelings for her were never reciprocated. In any case, at that point, her career was over. Whether directly as a result of the scandal or because, as of the early 1920s, the Beaux-Arts style of sculpture that brought Munson fame was fading from popularity. In 1922, at age 30, Munson attempted suicide. Although she was found before it was too late, her mental health continued to slide. Her mother had her committed at the age of 40 to a state psychiatric facility where she lived until her death in 1996 at the age of 104. Below the bronze plaque and the sculptures of sacrifice and duty, a fountain dazzles. Water gushes from a spiky-toothed ram's head mask in the center into a high and wide, centrally curved granite basin. The architect had chosen Knoxville marble for the memorial. One article noted that its warm, slightly pink tone had been a factor in making the Morgan Library on 36th Street one of New York's chief delights. And dramatic pink and gray tones visibly streak the memorial basin, as well as the rounded steps that encircle it. It is one of the most handsome fountain basins in the city. It appears, however, that once the location moved to a high mound on Riverside Drive, the fountain basin, initially intended to water passing horses, became purely decorative, most likely because the horses would have had to climb a lot of steps to get to it. In 1927, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals installed a bronze tablet on the terrace in front of the fountain, dedicating it to the horses that once pulled the fire department's engines. All of this is set on an expansive terrace, 66 feet across and 41 feet deep. When the monument was dedicated in September of 1913, the parade to its unveiling included 40 pieces of century-old fire equipment and one hand pump dating back to 1725, scores of fire department dogs, and a half dozen of the department's oldest horses, veterans of thousands of fires. 7,000 firefighters from Philadelphia, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Portland, Oregon, as well as, of course, New York's own, joined the march uptown from 57th Street. 1,200 fire chiefs from all parts of the world in town for the convention of the International Association of Fire Engineers were among the 4,000 dignitaries in the viewing stands. According to The Sun, 10,000 persons stood with uncovered heads while 4 little girls, daughter of firemen who lost their lives fighting the flames, pulled aside the American flags veiling the monument as the band played the Star-Spangled Banner. 53 other girls whose fathers had died in the fires assisted in the ceremony. All were dressed in white and wore bouquets of roses donated by the Parks Department. The Firemen's Memorial has undergone extensive renovations twice. First in the late 1930s. Apparently, in the winter of 1935, children sledding down the hills used the bowl of the fountain to build fires to warm themselves. The following year, the New York Times reported on the resulting damage, noting that the stone, which was difficult to match, was cracked and destroyed. The damage spurred a WPA conservation of the monument. A second major renovation, this one costing $2 million, took place in 1992 after water seepage between the marble and the brick foundation caused the stone to bulge and shift and the water to be shut off for decades. By that point, the fountain had earned the dubious distinction of being the most deteriorated of all Riverside Park's many monuments. However, on a brighter note, during the dismantling of the monument, a copper box was discovered within the foundation. The Times reported that it contained letters from the architect, as well as the badge and firebox key of the city fire chief, that's Fire Chief Croker that we talked about before, who saw his deputy, that would be Charlie Kruger, die in 1908 in a fire on Canal Street that inspired the monument. In 2022, thanks to a generous private donation, improvements to the memorial included repointing joints, cleaning the bronze plaques and statues, and repairing masonry and stairs. In 2024, someone broke the nose of one of the southern figure, but that has since been repaired. And most sadly, in the past year, there has been, once again, no water. A pipe is broken, and there is currently an issue with gaining access to this very small vault in order to fix the broken pipe. And there is no date scheduled for the repair. Each October, for decades, on the Fire Department of New York Memorial Day, there has been a ceremony at the site to honor all firefighters who died in the line of duty in the past year. In addition, every year since September 11th, 2001, Riverside Drive near the Firemen's Memorial has closed to traffic for blocks as throngs of white-gloved firefighters solemnly pay respects to their brethren who fell on that day at the World Trade Center. Bagpipes play. Now, when this talk began, I noted that at the end I would touch very briefly on the two other Bloomingdale monuments that are also fountains. And back in 2024, the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group treated us all to a very thorough presentation by Rob Garber and Joan Adler on the Strauss Memorial, and that focused on the history in the home. So I'm going to talk just a little bit now about the Fountain Monument itself. I mentioned earlier that after its first chairman, Bishop Potter, passed away, the Firemen's Memorial Committee was headed by Isidore Strauss, who had lived between 105th and 106th Street across from where Strauss Park and the Strauss Monument now stands, and just 6 blocks north of the Firemen's Memorial. Although, like the Firemen's Memorial, it memorializes a tragic event, the Strauss Memorial also tells more of a love story. As I'm sure you recall, Ida and Isidore were passengers on the Titanic when it hit the iceberg, and although women and children had the right to board the lifeboats first, Ida refused to leave her husband of many years, and both perished together. On April 15th, 1915, 3 years to the day after the Titanic went down, the monument was dedicated in what was once called Bloomingdale Square, but renamed Strauss Park soon after the tragedy. The larger-than-life bronze sculpture, Memory, is the park's tender and touching centerpiece. Architect Evarts Tracy designed it, and Augustus Lukeman, an American specializing in historical monuments, sculpted it. The statue is not, as some assume, a portrait of Ida, but is instead allegorical. The design depicts a woman reclining languorously on a granite plinth. Her head rests on one hand, while the other cups her chin. Her eyes are cast downward, gazing at the water below. She is lost in thought, or perhaps simply at peace. One sandaled foot dangles perilously close to the water, as the generous folds of her diaphanous gown drape across her. I have seen her with fresh lilies in her arms and a blanket of roses cozily around her body. Perhaps no surprise to anyone who has been on this call, Audrey Munson posed for the statue. Below the figure, water bubbles gently from a bronze lion's head into a semicircular two-tiered basin. From there, it once continued toward a rectangular reflecting pool, softened with a curve at its far end. In the late 1990s, the park was extended along its western side, renovated and given new benches, lighting, shrubs, fencing, and paving. Memory was restored and once again repaired in 2015, and the reflecting pool transformed into a flower bed, filled to this day with a bountiful array of buds. It is a setting both intimate and serene, and to its neighbors, very special. The memorial itself stands 6 feet high, 23 feet wide, and 47 feet deep, and behind the sculpture, a granite bench offers a place of rest for visitors. Inscribed in the curved granite wall are these words: in memory of Isidore and Ida Strauss, who were lost at sea in the Titanic disaster, April 15th, 1912. Lovely and pleasant were they in their lives, and in their death, they were not divided. At the time of its dedication, the New York Times called it one of the most beautiful monuments of its kind in the country. And lastly, also a memorial and fountain, but a very different one, the Frederick Douglass Memorial, Frederick Douglass Boulevard and West 110th Street. Frederick Douglass Circle marks the transition from the Upper West Side to Harlem. Today, the entire circular plaza is devoted to Douglass, the 19th century African-American abolitionist, orator, author, newspaper founder, statesman, and women's suffragist. The fountain's focal point is a contemporary 8-foot tall standing portrait sculpture of Douglass. The highly detailed bronze statue, its expression pensive, faces symbolically north toward Harlem, one hand resting on a podium. He stands imposing yet approachable at ground level. Douglass's autobiography, narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, became a bestseller. Following its publication, he traveled to England, where he spoke on the American anti-slavery movement and raised funds that purchased his legal freedom. After returning to the US, he published the abolitionist journal, The North Star, and continued to support the underground flight of the enslaved to freedom. During the Civil War, he was a consultant to Abraham Lincoln and later became the first African American to hold high US government posts. He was also the first African American nominated for vice president. His powerful speeches, widely quoted in media, are credited with helping to end legalized slavery in America. Water emerges from both sides and the base of a bronze water wall just to the west of the Douglass statue. A constellation of stars is etched upon that wall, including the Big Dipper and the North Star, the light that guided enslaved people traveling at night on the Underground Railroad. Fiber optic lighting illuminates the fountain's constellations in the dark. And that is our tour of fire, water, and memorial fountains of Bloomingdale. Thank you all for joining me this evening. Michael?
Thank you, Stephanie. For those of you who have any questions tonight about any of the slides you saw tonight, feel free to either ask them into the chat or you can raise your hand and also we can let you ask the question directly. Stephanie, thank you for the wonderful presentation. Again, this history group keeps surprising me on topics I've never realized were right in my own backyard growing up. And the amount of amazing fountains. I mean, I can recall the amount of times I've walked past the Strauss Park fountain and always wondered about the lion mouth spitting out the water, or never realized that the Frederick Douglass was also a fountain.
There you go.
So yeah, again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand or feel free to ask it directly into the chat and we'll let you ask it directly. And then as many of you who are from the neighborhood might have witnessed the memorial from the firemen that happened just yesterday, I believe. The amount of that were walking by. Oh, yes, Marjorie, go ahead.
Marjorie, did you have a question?
Let me see if this works.
I'll take my, how's that?
There we
Now
go.
we can hear you. Okay.
Thanks. Question, how did anybody steal that bas relief?
That's an excellent question. I think they must have come very well prepared. How no one heard this? I'm assuming this was done in the middle of the night. They must have been very quiet. Yeah, that's an excellent question. That was a very, very big piece of copper to steal. Mhm.
So they just took the whole
Yeah,
thing.
they must have. Yeah, yeah. It's
That's
amazing what
incredible.
what evil can be done if people
Right.
try hard enough.
When they want to, yeah. Well, thanks for that. It was great, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Yeah, one of the things I wondered was I was actually impressed by how these different pieces of the original monument kind of just ended up in different places across the Upper West Side or other areas.
Yeah.
And then do you know any plans? You said there might not be any for fixing, at least currently, for fixing the current state of the memorial.
Yeah, I spoke with the Riverside Park Conservancy, and of course they're aware of the problem and they're looking for a solution to it. But as of now, there is not work taking place, and there's not a specific date given for that to happen.
Got it. Yeah, and actually, when I was going out putting up some flyers about this, I was actually made aware of the famous the the model Aubrey.
Yes, Audrey
Yes,
Munson. Yeah.
Audrey Munson. Yeah, yeah, and the I was made aware of how often she had posed for these local statues across and also across the city. And so I was taking an intern and just showing them, oh, like look at the Strauss Park. That's apparently that's like this is Audrey Munson. Then we the Firemen's Memorial, and then yeah, it's just I think again faces that I spent a lot of my time growing up and seeing across different places, not realizing it's the same face I've seen over and over.
That woman is everywhere. Yes.
All right. And also just a reminder for anybody who joined in late, the presentation will be up on YouTube. It should be visible for anybody right after the presentation ends. And then it'll be on the website tomorrow morning as well. So you can share it with your friends. And if you didn't catch the entire thing, feel free to watch it again. Oh, and before I forget, those of you who might have joined in late might not have seen the link to the presentation's book launch. Anybody who is here on the presentation or on the history group mailing list, feel free to, come to the book launch as well at Book Culture happening next week.
So thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Thank you, Marjorie. Thank you, Michael.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks. Thanks, Steph.
Night, everyone.
Good night.
Hi.